My uncle was a Navy SEAL and refused to go near the ocean after retirement. He finally told me what pulled his team underwater. My Uncle Garrett died 3 weeks ago in his landlocked Montana cabin, 800 miles from the nearest coastline. The official report said heart attack, but I know better now. I know what really killed him, what had been slowly killing him for the past 19 years since he left the Navy. He was 52 when he died, which seems young until you understand that he'd been living on borrowed time since 2004, running from something that should have taken him back then. I'm his nephew Michael, and I'm writing this down because Garrett made me promise I would. Made me swear on our family name that I'd document everything he told me during those final days when the morphine wasn't enough to keep the nightmares away, and he finally broke his silence about what happened during Operation Serpent's Cradle. I should probably start by explaining who Garrett was before that mission. He'd been the golden child of our family, the one everyone pointed to as proof that hard work and dedication could take you anywhere. High school valedictorian, Division I wrestler, accepted to Annapolis before deciding that wasn't elite enough and going straight for Bud S training instead. He made it through Hell Week when 80% of his class rang out, earned his trident, got assigned to SEAL Team 3, and deployed to Iraq. My dad used to say that Garrett was born without fear, that he had ice water in his veins and could stare down death without blinking. I remember visiting him once when I was 12, right before his second deployment, and he'd seemed larger than life, radiating confidence that made everyone around him stand a little straighter. Then came 2004 and Operation Serpent's Cradle, and when Garrett came back 6 months later, he was a different person entirely. Not in obvious ways at first, not in ways that made the Navy brass concerned enough to deny his request for early discharge. He still looked physically capable, still had the build and bearing of an operator, but something fundamental had shifted in his eyes. Some essential piece of him had been scooped out and replaced with a hollow wariness that never went away. He stopped talking about the Navy, stopped responding to messages from his old team members, turned down invitations to reunions and memorial services. Most notably, he moved to Montana and refused to go anywhere near large bodies of water. Not just the ocean, but lakes, rivers, even swimming pools made him visibly uncomfortable. My dad tried to get him to go fishing once, and Garrett had a full-blown panic attack just looking at the lake. For 19 years, that's how things stayed. Garrett living alone in his cabin, working odd jobs, and the rest of us pretending not to notice how he'd check every window 3 times before bed, or how he'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night. I visited him, occasionally, maybe twice a year, driving up from Denver. The visits were always strange, Garrett clearly happy to see family, but also tense, like he was waiting for something to happen. His cabin was in serious isolation, no neighbors for 5 miles in any direction, no internet, barely any cell service. He had a ham radio setup that he monitored obsessively, and shelves full of canned goods, like he was preparing for an apocalypse that only he knew was coming. The call came on a Saturday morning in early November, my mom's voice shaking as she told me that Garrett had collapsed and been rushed to the hospital in Kalispell. By the time I made the 6-hour drive, he'd already been diagnosed with acute heart failure. They gave him maybe 2 weeks. Garrett refused hospitalization, signed himself out against medical advice, and had me drive him back to his cabin. During that drive, he was quiet, staring out the window with an expression that looked almost relieved. When I asked what he was thinking, he said he was surprised he'd made it this long, that he'd expected something else to get him years ago. That first night, he was restless, tossing and turning despite the medication, mumbling things I couldn't quite make out. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to him screaming, not the usual nightmare sounds, but something raw and terrified that made my skin crawl. I rushed into his room and found him sitting up in bed, eyes wide, pointing at the window. "It's here," he kept saying. "It's finally here. It found me." I looked at the window and saw nothing but darkness and pine trees, told him he was safe, that he was just having a bad dream. But Garrett grabbed my arm with surprising strength and said that it wasn't a dream, that he'd been running for 19 years, and now time was up. He looked at me with complete lucidity, despite the pain medication, and asked if I wanted to know the truth about what happened during Operation Serpent's Cradle, about why he'd spent nearly 2 decades hiding in the mountains, and what he told me next changed my life forever. The rest of the story is linked below or on my channel.